This is the Storyworks Roundtable, where we have conversations about craft. Because becoming a successful author begins with writing a great story. Hello and welcome to tonight's Storyworks Roundtable. Today we are talking further about dialogue. Tonight we're going to cover how it's different from real life and how to use dialogue to advance your story. Then if there's still time, we might go a little into dialects. Now there is a companion episode, not really part 1 and part 2, but there's another episode on dialogue in which we talked about dialects, character gestures and action, dialogue tags, and some of our dialogue pet peeves. So you can find that at storyworkspodcast.com. And do you remember which episode number that one is, Kathryn?
Yeah, it's number 30.
Number 30. There you go. All right. So, dialogue in fiction, how is it different from real life? In so many ways.
No one should be coming in and saying, "How was your day, Kathryn?"
That's right. Nobody cares how my day was.
Nobody cares. That's right. Yeah.
Unless it advances your plot, your character arc, or your theme, right?
Exactly.
Yes.
That's always the guiding light, though, isn't it? But I guess we don't want to clutter dialogue with the meaningless exchanges that populate probably most of our dialogue every day, unfortunately. So the idea is that you want to strip it back so that it becomes something that's both enjoyable to read and not just a ping pong interchange. Oh, my day was fine, thank you. Yeah, what did you get up to? Oh, well, I had to drop in at the supermarket on the way back home, where, funny enough, I bumped into Jane, but she ignored me. But unless Jane is relevant to the story, or that's a kind of some kind of red herring we're supposed to follow, we just don't care. And I think early writers think, this is showing character, it's bringing life to people, and yes, it does, but it's boring.
It is. Well, when I see that in a story, it's what I call hyper real, because the writer is focused so much on the protagonist's movements through their life or through their experience that they try to give you every single movement beat by beat. And as writers, you need to know when to pull back and say, this is a perfect place to use narrative summary, and say, Joe left work, stopped at the grocery store, and got home. He greeted his wife, and then boom, a sentence or two later, get us into some action, because dialogue, like all of fiction, is art. So we need artifice that helps us move things along.
Dialogue is art. I like it.
Yes. It's not conversation. It's dialogue. Art.
And I like how you summarized that entire conversation that he had with his wife. He greeted his wife. And I was finding, I was writing a short story today, part of a short story, and I found that I just summed up, and he told him, the reader already is going to know what he told him about, because the whole scene up to there had been him, having this experience, and so then he's going to relate it to his friend. Right. You don't have to rehash it.
Yes.
You can just say, so I told him.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, do not tell the reader what the reader already knows, unless it's very purposeful and necessary. Like 30 pages later, we need a quick reminder of that thing that is now, coming to fruition. But yes, yeah. And, really
have to be the whole conversation.
No, oh God, no, please don't. No, and there's a really neat method or device we can use as fiction writers, where, say, you've got Kathryn's situation where your character has a whole workday that the reader experiences with the character, and then goes home and has to tell wife about the whole workday. So you give us one sentence of dialogue that introduces the topic, so we know he's going over this, but then you go into narrative exposition, leave the dialogue, and tell us about the setting or the mood or the passage of time or some physiological thing happening for that paragraph, doesn't have to be long. And then give us that sentence of dialogue that closes the conversation. And the reader will understand that narrative summary covers the time in which Joe was telling his wife all about his day without forcing us to relive it.
Right.
It could be something like, well, it was good until Charles called me into the office. Then I watched her face fall as I related the events of the day. And by the time I finished, her mouth was hanging open. So there you've just related an entire day, and you've given the impression that maybe, a lot of dramatic things happened, which the reader may have known some or all. So you can do that whole sort of flash forward thing or flashback without having to actually describe everything specifically. But it's a real art to that. I think there's an art to that in revision as well. You come back and you see where you've been heavy-handed in repeating or over explaining things with dialogue.
Yeah, definitely. And I like what you were saying there, Robert, about the wife's face, her facial expression changing. Yep. So if you have to have a moment that repeats a previous moment, you've got to shift the focus. So there, not only would we use that narrative summary I was talking about, but the focus leaves Joe and his day and it goes to the wife's reaction. So then we're advancing the story not through the event, but through the emotional content of the character's relationship. So that can be a very powerful way to use dialogue without rehashing something.
I also think, I'm a fan of less is more. And obviously there are exceptions to that. And anyone who's read Ayn Rand knows that there's about 100 pages of monologue in Atlas Shrugged. It's just unbelievable. It just goes on and on and on and on. And I go, wow, that is a speech and a half. And it's definitely too much. By the time you've gone past 10 pages, it's too much. But obviously, there's clearly it's intended. It's specific.
Right.
I am much more of a fan of the kind of lead child type of dialogue interchange and Elmore Leonard, where it is very snappy. It's a very modern style. So I suppose if you go back and read the Jane Austens and Brontes of the world, you'll get a different feel. And so it's obviously a personal choice as a writer. But as a reader, I know that's what I love. I love the fact that things get left out, and I love misdirection in dialogue. I love that somebody might ask a question, but the response is not even an answer, or it might be another question. So what were you doing at the gas station? Yeah, who told you? Or that sort of thing where it's not a very specific ping pong. The ping pong dialogue I just find really boring, and it doesn't to me bring
right.
And I know it's how we speak, but it's not good in a story, in my opinion.
No, it isn't good in a story. And okay, you just said about 3 things I want to want to address here. So let's see if I can keep track of all 3 of them. First, the most recent, the ping pong dialogue being how we really speak. It is and it isn't. If we were listening to an audio recording of our conversations with people, that would be how we speak, that back and forth, A, B, A, B. But if you're in a room with someone talking, you've got 5 senses going, not just your ears. So you're looking at the person, you're reading their body language, their gestures, there's a mood in a room, there's light, you might stretch a muscle, you might be distracted and, clean your fingernails or whatever someone's doing. And so when writers put that A-B ping-pong-y dialogue on the page, they're neglecting the scene. They're dropping the scene off the page just to give us a transcript of an audio recording. And that's not story. That's not art. You need to be in your point of view character's physical experience in a scene, an entire scene. So, don't write a play script if your goal is to write a novel.
Yeah, I just reminded me. I was
so there.
About Lee Child, and again, his dialogue is terse. But I just remember there's one there's a couple of books where he's on the phone to this particular person who effectively didn't replace him, but took over later on his position in the military police. And for whatever reason, he has to ring, and he finds out that it's a woman, and he gets hold of this woman. And so some of it is the dialogue, but some of it is also him thinking. I'm trying to imagine her on the phone. She's 37, maybe 38. She speaks in clipped sentences like she's used to keeping information short. She sounds weary. There's something on her mind. So that's all kind of snipped in between the actual dialogue interchange they're having as well. And that is like real life, as you said. You are going to be talking to someone and you're going to think, is that a zip on above her eyebrow? You're going to be looking at something like that. Think, oh, wow. So I think that's very clever of you to say that dialogue is not just the interchange, it's the everything that's woven around it, and that's where the art comes in.
Yes, it is. And then another piece of the art or the artifice is the subtext. It's what the writer leaves off the page that the reader picks up between the lines, so it's the things characters don't say to each other, but that you use this entire scene I was talking about to convey more meaning to the reader than what is just there in the spoken words. We do that with each other all the time, and we don't even think about it. And of course, in fiction, it's a little more challenging because you have to get kind of technical and decide what a character means but isn't going to say, and how you can convey that. Is it through the body language? Is it through the emotion? How do I describe that to the reader? Is it an allusion to something without using the word that they really mean? So that's a major part of the artifice of fiction, but it's also so rewarding for readers because then you're in on the story. You get meaning that is deeper than the surface level, and that's part of the fun.
Right.
I think, for me as a reader.
Definitely. And that's the art of taking. So it's one thing to go from ping pong type dialogue to dialogue that's interesting, but then it's another thing completely to then deepen that even further with the subtext or with what's being deliberately left out or what's being unreliably given in dialogue perhaps as well. So there's a lot of different ways you can express that art. I think it's. I love dialogue. I think when I start reading a book, I look for where do the dialogue tags appear in the text. I hate books where it's just it's hard for me to read something like Tolkien because you do get pages and pages of description and narrative and exposition. And I love dialogue because it just, to me, it brings everything to life. I don't know what it is. Yeah, maybe that's why I like the action genres more. And not that I don't like exposition well written, but I just love the fact that dialogue can bring things to life. So it's so disappointing when it's not well explored.
Yeah, it is. It is disappointing when it's not well explored, and it's also, for me at least, disappointing when it's not well balanced with the narrative, because for me, then, as I said, it's like the scene just drops off the page. But the other piece of this balance is that dialogue needs to be well developed in order to advance a story. So dialogue, like every part of story, serves the precise and specific purpose of moving your reader forward through your narrative, up that plot arc, through that thematic content, getting that protagonist closer to the climax. And, if you want to learn something about using dialogue to advance a story, you should go read plays. Because a script is just that. You've got a little bit of setting description. You've got a little bit of stage directions giving you major movements, the broad brushstrokes. But for the most part, playwrights leave that off the page because directors will have their own vision. Each theater is going to have a different kind of stage or different, tools available to use, and set designers. So you as the writer get to control all of those pieces and then work the dialogue as one of those threads that will pull the reader forward through the story. So if you want to really learn how to use dialogue, read the plays.
Yeah, that's a good tip.
So how do you guys use dialogue to advance your stories?
Well, I mean, stories are all about conflict, and conflict usually involves more than one character. So get those characters that have the conflict on the page together and make them spitball at each other. That's how I just love to get two characters that I have developed into a room together and watch them go at it. And and just mine the gold out of that, and then rewrite until I get it just right. Where you have that, like we were talking about earlier, you don't have the how are you throat clearing dialogue. You have the punchy straight to the gut. Here comes that conflict. Joe comes home from work and his wife says, "Why were you at the gas station today?" Not. I saw you at the gas station. You were supposed to be at work. What happened? You don't have any of that. Hi, honey. How are you? What happened at work today? And you get that conflict immediate. And dialogue can be so rife with, like he's talked about, the subtext that you can just make a reader go, ooh, like,
Right. And a great example of pulling all of these elements together, hopefully great, because I'm coming up with this on the fly. Like, say the wife, we'll call her Kathy, sees Joe at the gas station when he should have been at work. So Joe comes in and Kathy's fixing dinner and he says, "Hi, honey, how was your day?" and gives her a kiss on the cheek, but she doesn't answer him. Right? So there's your very normal, mundane, everybody says that when they come in, but the subtext is, Kathy's mad, right? Something's wrong. And now the reader, if we have both point of views or we're only in Kathy's point of view, then the reader knows what Kathy knows, which is more than Joe. Joe doesn't know why he's in trouble yet, but Kathy does. So that's part of the fun of that subtext. And then you can very quickly, the fight has already started just with her kind of giving him the cold shoulder, and you can, and you can quickly go into that tension, however you want to play it out, whether you want to continue the she's not talking and that's the source of the tension, or go right into an argument, where she calls him on it, however those characters behave.
Right. And I think it's easy for us to fall into the trap that dialogue is meant more for characters just to have conversations or to plan the next thing or to plan the next action or whatever is coming next, and to really drop into that where you need to view the dialogue as part of the conflict that escalates the conflict rather than just the stepping stone from one action to the next, which is easy to forget, at least for me.
Right. Well, and as you're saying, dialogue should never just be a way for characters to talk to each other. It has to advance the story, but not all dialogue can be conflict-oriented.
Right.
We also can use dialogue as a great way to explain something to the reader in a way that is still engaging and exciting to read on the page. That's why so many heroes have sidekicks, because, if you're alone in your hideaway, unless you talk to yourself all the time, you aren't going to get all of the machinations of what you're doing and what you're thinking and how things are going to play out on the page. So having somebody to plan with can really help you advance your story for the reader without always using summary. And then, so it doesn't become routine and boring. Look at your subplots. How do these characters having this conversation relate to each other? What is the tension between them? Maybe the hero wants the sidekick to do something he's not really prepared to do yet. So there's fear and anxiety around this while they're explaining the next step of the plot to the reader.
Right.
So you have to look at everything in multiple layers. It's not enough just to do one thing.
Right. What is it revealing about your character? How is it pushing them, or how is it, conflict? There's all sorts of different facets.
Right.
And sometimes you may go back and revise something, I guess, that maybe you did have as a piece of exposition before, and then you think, oh, hang on a minute, I've got two other characters, I can have some interchanges here, I can reveal a bit more of the protagonist's maybe snarkiness or something in that interchange, but I can also drip feed some information that I really need to have. I'm rereading Silence of the Lambs at the moment, and Starling has just gotten on a little propeller powered plane with Crawford, and she's having to read up on the Buffalo Bill file, and so she's is a bit of internal monologue where she's looking through the photos and things like that. And prior to that, somebody's kind of rushed in and dragged her out of a lesson on fraud, I think it is, and said, "Hey, Starling, you do fingerprints, don't you? You ever done a floater?" And so it's like, she's not, there's not this conversation that says, I'm looking for somebody who's fingerprinted a body that's been found in water. No, this is, in FBI fashion. It's,
right.
You've done a floater. Well, not technically a full floater, but I've done hands that were sent through the mail. And you start to get a sense of how gruesome it is, but it's not being all explained. It's wonderful. And then on the plane, they're having this, she's reviewed the file, and you hear her reactions to the photos, but then it's her and Crawford talking about the case. As you say, you've got the sidekick, even though he's her superior, he's still effectively a sidekick respect, and they use that to get the exposition to advance the plot along.
Yeah, definitely. And I love when you were just kind of talking about dialogue there, it brings up a great point about naturalistic dialogue. So you don't want to avoid contractions or avoid jargon or whatever is true to your character in that situation. So don't use that character's speech to explain to the reader what the jargon means. You're going to have to put that into the POV character's thought or a bit of exposition if it really needs to be defined. But don't have your characters say things that they wouldn't really say to each other, because it becomes awkward. It's like disingenuous sounding.
Well, I suppose in the movie it's like breaking the fourth wall, isn't it? It's almost turning to the camera or turning to the reader and saying, this is the moment where I explain to you how forensic fingerprinting is done with a body that's been in the water for a while. So yeah, I suppose it depends on your intention with how the plot advances and what voice you're writing it to, but definitely don't automatically assume that you've got to use dialogue to explain things.
Right. No, and as a rule, you shouldn't. If your character needs to explain something to another character, then it's appropriate to use dialogue. But you should never use dialogue to explain something to the reader, because in the story, you don't exist and the reader doesn't exist. So using that fourth wall idea, you need to keep it present so that your characters are moving within the universe that you create as naturally as if this really was life in the real world. If you're writing a story that's kind of like Ferris Bueller, where you break that fourth wall and your narrator is a character storyteller who's going to directly address the reader, that's different, and unusual. But yeah, beyond that, don't do it. So other thoughts on advancing story through dialogue, or how it's different from real life? I'm seeing shaking heads here. All right, well, that'll do it for this episode of the Storyworks Roundtable. Thank you for listening to the Storyworks Roundtable. Find all our shows, show notes, and videos at storyworkspodcast.com.